Thank you very much, Mr. Director, for this very kind invitation to be here this evening. Thank you all for attending. And of course, I would like to start with a heartfelt thank you to the school for its ongoing interest in not just classical Greece, but also its more recent embodiments. So here we are. 2021 was going to be our year. It was going to be the year when Greece, by way of celebrating its national bicentenary, would find the chance to advertise on a global scale its accomplishments as a modern nation state, but also grasp the opportunity to rebrand itself. And as Greek rebrandings usually go, this effort too would entail a generous portion of the famed Greek antiquity, suitably repackaged in order to satisfy the country's international audience, one consisting primarily, it would seem, of die-hard representatives of the ever-present boomer generation. And it's so nice to have so many non-boomers here tonight. This is a video projected at some point on the House of Parliament, and as you can see, it traces the idea of the War of Independence back to Aeschylus's Persians. And of course, the ever-present Acropolis. So in order for Greece to celebrate the significant landmark in its history, a national committee, fittingly and unexcitingly titled Greece 2021, was created soon after the general election of 2019, when the Conservatives returned to power, in order to represent 2021 as a window of opportunity for the future of Greece. Placed directly under the Prime Minister, the committee would be, according to its Constituent Act, apparently in charge of the development of the national narrative of Greece, aiming at the forging of a uniform image and identity for the country and its institutions, affecting the promotion of Greece's comparative advantages and singularities. The committee was to be led by none other than Yanna Angelopoulos Daskalaki, who also famously led the committee for the 2004 Olympics with rather dubious results if the gargantuan budget deficit of that endeavor is anything to go by. It would have been interesting, though, I think, to observe how the official bicentenary celebrations would have chosen to represent the Greek nation to itself and others. The unfortunate outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has dampened down the national effort to a significant extent. Conferences and exhibitions were postponed to a more appropriate post-pandemic future moment, whereas what was in fact produced bears the strong marks of the pandemic biopolitics: social distancing, masks, quarantine as a way of life. Think, for example, the by now mostly forgotten publicity stunt produced by the 2021 committee, advertised as the Celebrations video clip, aired sometime in October 2020, and officially labeled "May the Dances Never Stop" from the well-known Dionysis Avopoulos song used in it. If anyone in the audience remains oblivious of this 1983 Greek hit, let them be assured that there's no need to ever look it up now, with its bluntly nationalist candor, its blatant historical anachronisms, its exuberant yet sadly outmoded exceptionalism, and its ever so thinly disguised xenophobia. This song, like its maker, has long passed its sell-by date. Rather than introducing a new window of opportunity to imagine the future of Greece, it very much offers an explanation as to what went so frightfully wrong in its recent past. The choice of venue was also unimaginative, though not without its own symbolisms. For it was here, in a neoclassical stadium ostensibly reviving a classical Greek one, that the first Olympic Games of the modern era took place, back in 1896. And it was this stadium that Greece would revisit time and again in order to provide its modern national celebrations, commemorations, and rituals with the allure only classical materialities may offer. And although most in the country may have forgotten it, but of course, Professor Koulouri reminded everyone last month, I take it, it was in this stadium that Greece's centenary was finally celebrated, and I will return later to this picture and explain what it shows. And I say finally, because back then, once again, luck was not on our side, as 1921, the year of the centenary of the Eikosiena, coincided with the war in Asia Minor, leading to the shocking defeat of 1922, Greece's famously immortalized Eikosidio. The centenary celebrations had to be postponed for 1930, when the centenary of the establishment of the Greek state was eventually celebrated, which means see you all in 9 years. And since this evening I find myself on French ground, as it were, I cannot help the temptation to tease my hosts and audience a bit by reminding everyone of the launching of the Christian Dior 2022 collection in June 17 of the bicentenary year, last June, also taking place in the Panathenaic Stadium, where apparently a horde of 400 international celebrities were subjected to a 30-minute long catwalk from the Night of the Living Dead, only with fireworks. This show, whose poster seemed to have come from a taverna in Plaka, where it would serve as paper tablecloth to Greece's precious guests, savoring dolmathakia and calamarakia tiganida, was dubbed en croisière, and indeed it worked hard to reinforce Greece's image as a land of classical ruins, simply lying there, silent and inert, dusty and lonely, waiting to entertain the cruise crowd and play scenery to the tourist fantasies. And yet, this is an image we have worked hard to fashion in Greece, insisting that we are as ancient and modern as Western fantasies would make us. As this is a lecture on the ways modern Greece employs classical imageries in order to stress its modernity, I should like to dwell a bit on those celebrations from 1930, as studied and commented upon by my friend and colleague Dora Markatou, among many others. In 1918, the Greek Parliament enacted a special law according to which 1921 was established as the official year of the centenary celebrations for the Greek Revolution. The Venizelos government formed a central committee for the centenary commemoration of the Greek Revolution, which was replaced by another committee in 1921 when Venizelos was ousted from power. The new committee was eventually forced to postpone the event until 1930, owing to the Asia Minor campaign and Greece's subsequent defeat. Thus, in 1928, the Venizelos government, who was once again in power, formed another committee, which eventually organized the centenary commemoration. The members of these committees were representative of the whole range of the country's public life, including a number of archaeologists. The academics in charge of the celebrations considered classical antiquity fundamental for the palingenesis of the nation. Among the archaeologists who sat on the special committees, we find Christos Chountas, chairman of the committee for the representation of the various eras in the life of the Greek nation, as well as Georgios Sotiriou, Anastasios Orlandos, Panagis Kavadias, Ioannis Voronos, Konstantinos Kourouniotis, Georgios Ikonomos, Alexandros Philadelpheas, Adamandios Adamandiou, and Spiridon Marinatos. On April 27, 1930, a flag ceremony took place in the Panathenaic Stadium, designed as an exact reenactment of the Panathenaic procession, refitted to suit the modern Christian era. Instead of Athena's peplos, the procession would carry the Greek flag. The ceremony was accompanied by representations of the three eras of the nation, the ancient Greek, the medieval and the modern, following the tripartite scheme introduced by Paparikopoulos in the late 19th century. On the day, soldiers and sailors paraded next to dancers and athletes dressed as ancient or Byzantine Greeks, and of course next to fustanella-clad Ebzones. The parade included 2 rows of 5 Minoan maidens, since prehistoric Crete was already then incorporated into an ethnically homogeneous national Greek history. As Marcatou notes, this was not the first time the Minoans were paraded as Greeks, as the celebration included both a religious procession and a bloodless sacrifice from the Minoan period, had been staged in the same venue the year before. And these photographs show that ceremony from 1929 with the Minoan bloodless sacrifice, and on the right you see the Byzantine group. And obviously we all know that this may not have been the first, but it was not going to be the last either, since, as we all remember, the bare-breasted Minoan goddess implausibly opening the historical pageant for the 2004 Athens Olympics. One would be allowed the conclusion that, as national narratives go, nothing much has evolved in this country for 3 generations or so. By choosing to film the bicentenary video clip in the marble-laid Panathinaike Stadium, where Greek modernity reinvented itself as neoclassical heterotopia, the 2021 committee made certain it reminded everyone who might care to listen that Greek bodies remain faithful to their archaeolatric selves as the years go by. Under the trivialities of the staging, and as the carefully picked, all white, all good-looking, able-bodied cast mimed the song as if in fact they wanted to render some sort of postmodern parody of it, the committee made clear its intentions as to the strategies it was going to deploy in the following months in its attempt to monumentalize Greek public history, Greek collective memory, and in fact, Greek time. Talking about time, I have to show here this banner designed by the committee, where the trajectory of the Greek nation is shown to span from the Battle of Salamis and the figure of Pericles in classical antiquity to Kolokotronis and the 1821 revolution, Maria Callas and the internationally famous Nigerian Greek basketball player Giannis Antetokounmpo, a move that seems to have infuriated more than it pleased. Incidentally, but also very crucially, the tripartite structure of Greek history, seamlessly connecting Greek prehistory and history to the modern period through Byzantium, was also deployed ad nauseum by the combative virtue of the Hellenes festival in its various transmutations, originally introduced by the right-wing government of Konstantinos Karamanlis in 1959, and later appropriated by the military regime of the Heptaetia, ominously organized in the very venue of the Panathinaike Stadium. Here, parts of the video from 1966, so before the junta. Here's the siege of Troy, the sack of Troy, actually, just after the Trojan Horse episode. Here, an unfortunate Trojan being carried away, and then we sort of jump I don't know what this is, but then there's a close-up of a member of the royal family, and then there you are, and then that's the marathon runner giving the good news of the victory in marathon. But let me, however, dwell on Salamis for a bit. The 2021 banner did not include the Battle of Salamis in its pictorial narrative for Greek continuity by chance. If 2021 was the year of the Greek Bicentennial, 2020 was celebrated as the year of the 2500th anniversary of the naval battle of Salamis in 480 BCE, when the Athenian navy defeated the invading Persians and put an end to the Persian Wars. A series of events marking the joint anniversary since the Battle of Salamis and Thermopylae, which also happened the same year, were designed in order to commemorate and highlight the importance of the battles for the humanity as a whole, as Salamis, like Marathon 10 years prior, is still seen by many to mark, quite inexplicably, the very beginnings of Western civilization itself, as united forces of Greeks won over the Persian threat, paving the way for Greek classical antiquity to flourish. According to the official rhetoric, echoed in many reports in the Greek diasporic press at the time, at Salamis, the Greek youth of classical antiquity proved worthy of their brave ancestors. The sacrifice of many of them at the time marked the birthday of Western civilization, whose attachment to liberty, democracy, humanity, and fair play, that's Olympics for you, contrasts sharply with the absolutism, expansionism, and protectionism throughout history. In one of the celebratory events that took place in October 2019, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis claimed that since the Battle of Salamis also paved the way for the liberation of territories under Persian rule, for 30 years thereafter, the United Greeks embarked on campaigns to incorporate Ionia and thus created the image for the first time of a nation with Greece as its homeland, but with horizons throughout the world. Moreover, according to the Greek Prime Minister, 2020 would commemorate not just a historical event belonging to the ancient Greek tradition, but one of the most crucial turning points in the history of mankind. And as if one could find it difficult to understand the analogy between the Persian invasion and the present, he went on. In our times, the challenges are different. Waves of refugees and migrants are now besieging countries. The crisis is not just about borders and economies. And he went on. Democratic rules and rights require new processing. Europe is called upon to measure up to its ideals in order to respond to all this. And Greece needs to renew its role as a symbol of democracy and culture and as a meeting point for the people on the road towards progress. Meeting point, but not for everyone, apparently. Some of them have to stay home. In other words, the Athenians in Salamis fought for a world of pure, ethnically cleansed, white nation states, impenetrable by the barbaric aggression of a pre-modern and decidedly unmodernized Orient. In my recent work, I use this kind of anachronistic reasoning affected through the monumentalization of historical time, a reasoning I would define as both archaeolatric and archaeopathic, and so, in effect, archaeopolitical, in order to describe my notion of archaeomentality. I'm basing this on the work of Michel Foucault, governmentality. Archaeomentality is a term I use to term the governmental logic of prioritizing antiquity over the present, and thus assuming that the love of things ancient is inherent in modern national populations, thus forming a sort of historical destiny for a nation state such as Greece, Cyprus, Italy, or Turkey. Archaeomentality operates as a notional as well as physical platform through which to manage certain sectors within the population or even the population as a whole. In other words, archaeomentality is centrally deployed as a biopolitical mechanism in that it renders biopolitics more readily diffusible through the national body politic. Through the archaeopolitical agency of a monument such as the Panathenaic stadium, modern Greeks are managed into monumentalizing themselves as classical bodies when it comes to current affairs. I should add here that it was in this spirit that in November 2020, almost precisely a year ago, on the occasion of the National Armed Forces Day, coinciding with the Christian feast of the presentation of the Virgin to the temple, we also witnessed yet another video spectacular, this one projected on the facade of the House of Parliament in Athens, ostensibly honoring the Greek armed forces. The designers of the clip, which was sponsored by the Ministry of Defense and presumably materialized in some dark corner of the Greek Pentagon, so fit to commemorate Greek fighting spirit through the ages, linking modern Greece with its classical and medieval predecessors through yet another reminiscence of Salamis, though also Marathon, the heroic yet quite unfortunate flight of Icarus, and even the expedition to siege Troy, actually using clips from Wolfgang Petersen blockbuster movie from 2004. I was rather disappointed, and I was hoping that this extravaganza would be repeated this year, last week, but was disappointed. Archaeomentality is, of course, a regime conditioned by what one could identify as the particular breed of biopolitics, politics over life. I would call archaeopolitics. A public discourse that is both political and archaeological, in that it feeds off a collective desire for the materialities of the past in order to usher a new sort of political technologies into the present. Archaeopolitics is an acculturated form of biopolitics assimilated into discourses of the past rather than the present or the future. In archaeopolitics, I argue, control over life is disguised as a noble kind of love of things ancient, an archaeophilia, so to speak, an aspiration to a higher life model that is not imposed to anyone, but ought to be inherently felt by everyone. As a result, whereas biopolitics strives to organize entire populations according to a newly set disciplinary and regulatory economy, archaeopolitics mobilizes archaeophile sentiments in order to manage life in the present. The way I would define archaeopolitics, it is not about the political aspects of archaeological praxis in contemporary societies, of the political dimensions of archaeology, in other words, but an exploration of politics carried out through an archaeological way of thinking and acting. And as the examples I'm discussing today show, archaeopolitics is effective because it is at the same time corporeal and performative. A favorite example of this kind of deeply racist archaeopolitical transference from present to past and back again, so, and if I'm allowed a swift digression, is the drawing by Elias Makris, published in the Greek daily Kathimerini on 29th of January 2016. Let me remind you here the events at the time. As the Greek islands were inundated by Syrian refugees risking their lives in order to flee the terrors of war, Makris shows a personified Greece drowning in a sea of bearded men and hijab-wearing women. Quite appropriately, only the hand of Greece is visible, barely surfacing amidst the barbaric crowd, a hand clad in the antique meander motif, a motif that, as the Greek key, was usurped by both the Nazis and Greece's neo-Nazi Golden Dawn political party. Makris' cynicism, suggesting a metaphorical, a cultural, or a national, or a racial drowning of Greece at a time when Syrian refugees are actually drowned by their numbers on the Greek shores, is clearly employing Greece's much advertised classical ancestry in order to argue that its soil and people have to remain pure from any alien intruders, even if some of the latter must lose their lives in the process. In Greece, therefore, this kind of newly emerging thanatopolitical agenda is facilitated through the racial identification of its present inhabitants with the land of their ancestors, and identification systematically illustrated with images borrowed from the classical archive. A land, to be sure, the Greeks had to fight at Salamis in order to safeguard its integrity. A land liberated by the palikars of the modern Greek Eikosiena, ostensibly inspired by the ancient Greek predecessors. Think of the way, among many, many other examples, Greek ruins are time and again employed in order to punctuate images apparently celebrating the War of Independence and its heroes, strategically reminding everyone at home and abroad the classical pedigree of this land and its people. See, for example, how Carl Wilhelm von Heydek's Palikaren for the Temple von Corinth from 2019, and I'm reading this out in German just to remind everyone that the word Palikar was international at the time, was in French, was in English and German. So this painting, among many others, makes sure to install the painter's supposed subject, the Greek Palikars of his day, in a setting of classical ruins and Hellenic lore. Incidentally, von Heydek was, besides an accomplished painter of sorts, a Bavarian career military officer who eventually served as the third and lesser known member of King Otto's Regency Committee next to Armansberg and Maurer. Or see how in this painting by Linton, the Greek shepherd and his love interest find the true meaning only next to the ruins, thus fulfilling their quest to consume and be consumed by the picturesque. The nation's antiquity and its material remains are thus employed, in the words of Judith Butler, as part of a broader tactic to neutralize the rule of law in the name of security. Makris's drawing seemingly anticipates the Greek PM's assessment that the waves of refugees and migrants that are now besieging countries constitute a threat comparable to that of the Persian invasion for the classical Greeks, and that Salamis somehow paves a way that ought to inspire current politics. Even though this kind of systematic remaking of state and subject has been extensively observed across the West in the last decade or so, part of the persistent neoliberalization of public life, in Greece it follows a markedly archaeopolitical agenda that is one explicitly employing archaeological discourses or imageries in order to substantiate current political narratives. Through archaeomentality, Greece thus becomes a stable map, spatial as well as genomic, of normalized functions presented as culturally specific. At the end of the day, it might be for the better that 2021 did not, after all, take place. Jean Baudrillard would have loved this, I'm sure. And that we were left with just some performative attempts at mostly casual rhetoric. As it happened, March 25th, 2021, found the nation in the grip of the pandemic's second wave. In strict lockdown, once again, since early November of the previous year, and following the even stricter quarantine from March to May 2020, Greece was not at all prepared or even in the mood to celebrate the nation's palingenesis. Abiding to a peculiar as well as ineffective state of emergency of its own improvised design, the Greek government cancelled all public celebrations of the national bicentenary, save for a grand military parade scheduled to take place in Athens city center, to be attended by a few dignitaries and more military and police personnel, but off limits for the public at large. The photos I'm presenting in this section were shot by me on March 25th this year, and will be included in a visual essay on the bicentenary to be published by the Journal of Greek Media and Culture in a couple of weeks, as a matter of fact, and I'm surprised I was not arrested taking this picture. Hard pressed by the pandemic, the Greek government found itself organizing Greece's urban centers as deathscapes, notional landscapes of death and the cultural practices that surround it. It was an odd development, indeed, for a national celebration, though one that made perfect sense within our intense biopolitical present. As the commemoration rituals reached, televised, the national subjects locked in their homes, the bicentenary was turning itself into a non-event, and Athens in particular was being reconstructed as a non-space, a cancelled metropolis whose demos was at long last excluded from the public sphere. As if to underline this absence, a host of Greek flags excluded were placed on stands along Syntagma Square in yet another makeshift attempt to make a grand gesture out of half-baked ideas and banal symbolisms. This photo showing here was taken by Kostis Talos, one of the creators of the very popular Facebook page Athinologio. Turning the absence of bodies into a staged presence of political symbols, Greece proved better at organizing its citizens' deaths than providing for their lives or merely letting them live. 53 more deaths due to the COVID-19 pandemic were to be confirmed on that day of national celebration, bringing the morbid count up to 7,754. The tally was going to exceed the psychological threshold of 10,000 by Holy Week in late April, and will have superseded the 18,000 mark by the end of this week, or perhaps by the time I finish this paper. The catastrophic development of the COVID-19 pandemic in Greece as it happened marred our hopes that the bicentenary would afford us the opportunity to develop a national narrative of Greece, aiming at the forging of a uniform image and identity for the country and its inhabitants, in the hope of effecting the promotion of our nation's comparative advantages and singularities. When I accepted Gilles de Rapin's most kind invitation to come to the École française d'Athens this evening and offer my views on the commemoration of the bicentenary of the Greek Revolution back in October 2020, I was sort of hoping that there would be more to talk about. If the truth be told, the Salamis celebrations in the Panathenaic Stadium video clip that preceded the bicentenary year were enough to suggest that the nation would, once again, celebrate its palingenesis through a stereotypical recall of its classical glories. Back in 1905, the emblematic Greek historian Spiridon Lambros, who was instrumental in the preparations for the 1921 centenary, was arguing that modern Greece was liberated not only by the heroism and self-sacrifice of modern Greeks, ancient Greece also contributed to her freedom. In many respects, 2021 rhetoric, both by the government as well as several intellectuals, both at home and abroad, could not resist the temptation of linking modern Greeks with their phantasmic forefathers. In many ways, it was a good thing that the bicentenary never really happened, and that the 2021 committee, as well as the remaining of Greece's institutions, were left exchanging platitudes online, be that on the environment and climate change or globalization. More than just a missed opportunity, therefore, the Greek bicentenary was a series of false starts for a future no one really cares to envisage. One of these false starts, that is, a project initiated and devised in view of the bicentenary, but has yet to be realized, if at all, I would like to present this evening as my closing example of what I have called Greek archaeomentality. That is, a persistent effort on behalf of institutional as well as individual agents to present themselves as authentic as well as singular through a process of writing and rewriting the classical as well as its repetition, thus leading, in the words of Homi Bhabha, to the final irony of partial representation. Also, I would add, the ultimate irony of partial or focused commemoration, where the very act of commemoration itself has nothing to do with memory. As a matter of fact, it stands as its opposite. How does one forget through remembering? The quick answer would be through the sterilization of the mnemonic process itself, through the fossilization of any commemorative devices we inherited from modernity. My final example comes from the town of Tripolis, and the effort by the Tripolis municipality to redisplay the bronze statue of Theodoros Kolokotronis, one of the most emblematic heroes of the Greek Revolution. The statue was raised in 1971, is the work of sculptor Fannis Sakellariou. The pedestal serves as Kolokotronis' mausoleum, as it contains a crypt carrying his bones since 1993. Although Kolokotronis died here in Athens and was buried in Athens, his bones were taken to Tripolis in 1930. You can see here photographs from that ceremony. That was on the initiative of Eleftherios Venizelos. They were kept in another monument commemorating the War of Independence before their final transfer under the present statue. Recently, however, and in view of the upcoming bicentenary, the municipality of Tripolis expressed its desire to revamp the square where the monument stands. A competition was launched across the nation, apparently, for proposals for a new monument, and the selected submission was supposedly going to be executed in time for the celebrations, though nothing seems to have happened as yet. The selected proposal by local sculptor Dimitris Plantzos attempts to encase the statue and the ossuary in its vault with a suitably postmodernist neoclassical rendition of a classical Greek propylon with pediments and antefixes, decorative busts, shields and spears, a Christian icon, and, quite surreally, if I may add, two obelisks awkwardly dwarfed by the central structure and the statue itself. According to Plantzos, his proposal evokes and symbolizes Greek diachronicity through its monumental layout and solemn connotations. Envisaging a supra-historical past where Greek diachronicity is crassly monumentalized through sweeping generalizations, comical anachronisms, and pseudo-architectural bravado, the proposed monument promises to reunite the Greeks by re-Hellenizing the recent history, whereas in fact it threatens to marginalize more viewers than it actually inspires. Thank you.